All right, well, it's 6:03, so I think we could start. I would like to welcome everyone to the Child's Gallery Virtual Artist Talk with William Evertson as he discusses his current exhibition, Politics, Protest, History, and Myth. My name is Richard Baiano. I'm president of Child's Gallery. The exhibition is currently on view in our print department. We are open Tuesday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday and Sunday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Open to the public, no appointment necessary, and I will just make a note that we've extended this exhibition until December 31st, so there's plenty of time to come see it. I would like to remind everyone to stay on mute throughout the presentation. There will be a brief question and answer session following William's talk. You can feel free to submit questions via the chat feature, or if you have at a certain point, we'll allow you to unmute yourself and ask questions specifically. So with that, let me give you a brief little introduction on William's exhibition. This is from our press release. William Evertson's latest series of woodblock prints draws inspiration from the idea of fake news, disinformation, propaganda, and the construction of divisive narratives that drive our culture wars. The works in this exhibition layer culturally resonant imagery upon overlapping themes from both our national and global history and mythos, examining the nature of shared ideas in a climate of extreme politicization. The woodblock printing method provides a bold graphic media through which Evertson seeks to understand the structure of both past and present, combining historical research with old printing technology to comment on new but recurring issues. Evertson lays bare the pervasive societal flaws that cross time and culture. Using collaged imagery, often blending art historical and printmaking illusions with the modern references gleaned from the internet and television, Evertson creates familiar yet irreverent scenes packed with biting socio-political commentary, allowing an examination of our current politicizing rhetoric through historical counterpoints. So with that, I will turn the conversation over to William, and he'll run through a slide presentation, and then we'll go to the question and answer session.
Thanks. I'm very honored to be here, and I'd like to thank directors Catherine Fields and Julie for organizing the exhibit, as well as Ren for a beautiful job of hanging the art. And a special thanks to Richard for steering Child's Gallery as they exhibit some very resonant contemporary themes. And I'd especially like to thank everybody that's attending this evening. I appreciate the support really more than you can imagine. In my exhibit here at Child's, I'm exploring some difficult themes, and often these themes can be off-putting to collectors, but most of what we think of as meaningful in the history of art has been the result of taking some chances. I'll be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we'll, as Richard said, we'll open up the discussion for some questions. This first slide here shows just a couple of the walls of the print department where the exhibit is. The series of woodcuts that make up the exhibition relates to my interest in modern mythologies, especially as it relates to the construction of political meaning. Mythologies were a way of understanding unknowns or things that were otherwise inexplicable, and people were able to share a common understanding of reality via their shared belief systems. And conflicts occurred as a result of clashes between competing belief systems. Now, my work is examining modern myths and how propaganda and conspiracy combine to create the clashes of our culture wars. My capital offense piece, this was first exhibited in a group show at Child's a bit over a year ago. Now, The Capitol has been attacked only twice, once by an external enemy and once by a homegrown enemy. Stop the Steal is one example of propaganda that reached mythic status, at least within the MAGA community. Now, despite the recounts and court challenges of the last election, the idea of the big lie, that is a lie told over and over, persuaded thousands to riot and to storm the Capitol in an attempt to install Trump as president. Now, my working method is to really combine images, some contemporary, some historical, as a collage. And I use either Photoshop or preparatory drawings before I begin to carve a panel. Now, in this piece here, I'm using a British woodcut engraving that celebrates the burning of Washington from 1814. And it's combined with the news clip imagery of the January 6th insurrectionists. And a companion piece to this is None So Blind. The shared history of the January 6th insurrection is being contested still, despite witnessing it unfold on TV and in real time. Now, in this piece, the helmeted figure, to me, it represents the politicians that are gaslighting and otherwise denying the seriousness of the coup attempt. The figure looks away at a more pleasant object, despite the obviousness of the violence that's played out on camera for all to see. Indeed, it is a real power move to try to impose a false narrative on events and, in effect, to create an alternative myth. I'm working almost exclusively with wood blocks, and generally I carve a block for each color. So a black and white image, for instance, is printed just from a single block. These are the blocks that make up the None So Blind piece, and it's a multicolor print, and it requires a block for each color. They are registered and printed one at a time, usually with some drying time between each of the pressings. And so the blocks that went into this, there's 4 blocks, and they all need to align in the press. So the order I print in is generally from light to dark. So those first 2 that you saw would have been the first 2 that I print, and then I go to the darker reds and eventually to the black for the final color. Now these are pieces of plywood here. I'm using a Shinna plywood as the wooden matrix that I carve. But the color you see on it is just, I paint a random color on the blocks just to give me a little bit more contrast to help me see what I'm doing as I carve. Now, I want to back up just a little bit in time to give some credit to some artists that have inspired me as a printmaker. There is a tradition of social commentary in printmaking, and prints can be reproduced inexpensively and in multiples, and it makes them a lot more accessible to people. In essence, it's a more democratic art form. And I owe a debt across the centuries to artists such as Goya or Damier, Dürer, and I often reference them in my work. And I'd like to single out a few more contemporary influences. For instance, Kathy Kollwitz worked in an expressive style using really bold contrasts of black and white to create works of social and political commentary. And as a chilling parallel to current climate of right-wing violence and threats, and forced people from election boards, from school boards, and even from attending the drag queen story hours. The Nazi threats forced Kollwitz from her position at the head of the Prussian Academy of Art, and she was forbidden to exhibit her work. Another artist that I find very influential to my work is William Kentridge. Kentridge's engagement with printmaking has been integral to his artistic practice. He has experimented with a broad range of printmaking techniques, lithography, etching, and woodcuts. As a South African Jew, his explorations of migration and exodus, how history is written, and the uses of the absurd inform our understandings of apartheid. I'm also influenced by the work of Carl Walker. Walker uses drawings, paintings, text, puppetry, and sculpture to expose really ongoing psychological injuries that have been caused by the legacy of slavery. Her work often leads viewers to explore the past while exploring contemporary racial and gender stereotypes. I should mention I've got, hundreds of other influences, including Amslam Kiefer, Philip Guston, Jacob Lawrence, Linda Ward, and Franz Masriel. A lot of printmakers. Before I return to the woodcuts of my exhibit, though, I'm going to ask the audience to, just for a second, to contemplate who is this type of work intended for. The work of each of these artists I mentioned fill me personally with a sense of unease, yet I also feel empowered by it. So artists involved in social commentary speak for the marginalized and the oppressed and the powerless. And it's often difficult art, and it's often brooding, in many cases, not offering solutions, but simply acting as a witness to events. I think this is one of the oldest pieces in this particular series, and it dates from 2019. Sisyphus, of course, in mythology, was destined to forever be burdened with an unending task of rolling a boulder up a hill. The right-wing culture warriors' complaints about cancel culture, being treated unfairly in the media, singled out by the IRS, people using pronouns, making accommodations for the disabled. It seemed to me like so overblown that I chose to represent these burdens as flowers rather than a weighty boulder. That Russia thing, Vladimir Putin has been a master of manipulation. And the Mueller report outlined the many ways social media and election data were compromised to bolster Trump's election chances. Brexit is another example of Putin's worldwide reach to weaken democracies. In this piece here, what I'm doing is I'm using there's a debate exchange between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump where he says, "I'm no puppet, you're the puppet." And that's kind of a jumping off point for the way I'm trying to frame the social media manipulation of American opinion in this piece. Now, we've had a few weeks where I breathed a sigh of relief that the worst didn't happen during the midterms. And many of the candidates that promoted the big lie and election denial and stop the steal were defeated, but it really wasn't for a lack of trying. Persistence is a real trait with authoritarianisms, and the Russian anti-democratic rhetoric still is dominating the different right-wing media ecosystems as they regroup for the next election. Now, I'm working in one of the oldest of printmaking techniques, the woodcut, and there's different approaches to how you can go about making a woodcut. And I tend to use a combination of techniques from East and West. I use a Japanese layout method where I paste a thin paper that contains the imagery from each color that I need to do to the block. And I carve right through the paper. And then before inking, I wash the paper off and end up with like the image you see on the right. That's what the block looks like before I've inked it. This piece here, Sheltering Against Fascism Then and Now. I saw a picture of the citizens of Kyiv that were they were huddled in their subway. And it reminded me so much of pictures from World War II of Londoners in their tube during the Blitz. Now, Mark Twain is frequently credited with the saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And details change and circumstances change, settings, but similar events essentially recycle. And that's kind of what led this side-by-side stereographic imagery here. And I think it's safe to say that probably my entire series is about the threat of authoritarianism and the anti-democratic forces at play, both here and worldwide. This piece here was inspired by events that surrounded the white supremacist Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. The rally attracted many alt-right groups, including the Klan, neo-Nazis, and right-wing militias. And ostensibly, it was a rally that was going to protest the removal of Confederate monuments. But it resulted in the violent street battles with counter-protesters, and it resulted in one death and 30 or more serious injuries. The piece is inspired by Twitter, where a group of users identified the white nationalists and supremacist rioters from their cell phone coverage, and it led to the prosecution and arrest of many of the perpetrators of the violence. Rudy in disguise. Rudy, of course, is referring to Rudy Giuliani. And this image combines elements from a 1960s ad for televisions, a screenshot from the variety show The Masked Singer, where Giuliani appeared, and a skeleton from the 1500 anatomy book featuring woodcuts by Vselaus. And as a side here, the woodcut book is one of the finest early examples where woodcuts are used extensively to illustrate an anatomy book. Now, with so much of our media that's controlled by right-leaning individuals, there's a lot of normalizing going on of formerly marginal fringe voices and amplifying of anti-democratic rhetoric going on. It's in the guise of free speech. And I find much of our media is to blame for the rise of MAGA cult and the spread of hate speech and the spread of violence by the media's insistence on trying to look at both sides of an issue. Both siderism, I guess, is the new term for that. The piece itself is actually, it's a puzzle print. The area of the TV itself is, I cut that out and I fill it with seven different blocks because I wanted the TV to come through as a color TV. So I kind of pull off the Rudy's colorful Jack-in-the-Box disguise that he appeared in that TV show. The full-scale blocks contain black and gray colors, so we're in the piece. I lived in New York City from 1978 to 1987, and it was a time, much like today, where there was many unhoused people living on the streets. And I worked for a gallery there, and this man spent his nights in the doorway to the gallery. Getting him up and moving so that the gallery could open often fell to me. One day I met him while I was photographing the demolition of the West Side Highway. And I learned his name was Moses. He was a Vietnam vet, and he probably was suffering from what we now call PTSD. I've used his image several times over the years, and in this case here, to draw attention to the inadequate COVID response to the unhoused community. The burning barrel is a symbol of the broken promises made to our vets. In this piece here, Consumed by the Never Was, I believe that we're a product of the media we consume. Before the internet, the TV was the biggest source of media consumption, and we all shared kind of a Hollywood version of what America was, but it really never was. Yeah, many want to return to this make-believe version of America. Now that the internet age has really expanded the town square, it's become obvious that many were not represented in the TV America. Well, there was Black voices, queer voices, feminist voices, indigenous voices. The list of the marginalized really goes on and on. This family is watching both nostalgic shows, but also Steve Bannon, Alex Jones, coverage of the Tiki Torch rally with young white males chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Indeed, this family here is being consumed by their media choices. My piece, Still Life with Viktor Orban and Inverted Tucker. Viktor Orban, of course, is the Prime Minister of Hungary, which has become a blueprint, actually, for an illiberal democracy here in America. Orban's party has managed to gerrymander the country. It's bought up all the media outlets, it's packed the courts, and it oversees the curriculum for the educational system. And although elections are still held, making it a democracy, it's impossible that any other party can prevail. So recently, Orban was a keynote speaker here during the conservative CPAC convention. And his ultra-Christian beliefs and controls are held up as examples of using democratic means to establish an authoritarian rule. Now, severe immigration restrictions, abortion restrictions, and repression of LGBTQ rights serve as the conservatives' first steps for America's future. Now, the shoes in this, the print here, they represent the Holocaust Memorial, shoes along the Danube. And it consists of cast iron shoes that memorialize the Jews who were murdered during World War II when fascist militiamen shot them and threw them into the Danube. I inverted Tucker. Well, besides the fact that it's hard for me to look at his smirking face, he often turns truths upside down, using his pet phrase, "I'm just asking questions," as a fig leaf for his white nationalism. And this is a shot of me at the Center for Contemporary Printmaking from last year with None So Blind in the background here. The midterms did give me hope that the efforts of many journalists, political activists, cultural content creators, and artists aren't in vain. That we aren't a collective Cassandra where our warnings against the anti-democratic forces are destined not to be heard. And much like Kollwitz, Kentridge, and Walker, my art in this exhibition really seeks to reflect our time, to witness our struggles, and to make sure that the marginalized have a voice. So really come down to the conclusion of my prepared remarks. The Politics, Protest, History, and Myth is up for a while, and as Richard said, it's been extended till the end of the month here. I'd like to also mention you can view the entire exhibit by visiting the Child's Gallery website. And again, really thanks to the Child's Gallery staff for their support. And thanks to everybody that's listening to me ramble on with this presentation. And I guess at this point, I'm going to turn this back over to Richard to see if there's any questions either in the chat or in person.
So William, thank you very much. That was really fascinating. And I have some questions that I prepared, and I was going down two tracks, one to speak specifically about your art and then also about the content of the art. But since you were speaking so much about the content, I'd like to start with that. And I'm curious if you've always been engaged in political and social activism in your art.
Well, frankly, it comes and goes, but I guess the answer is yes. I've done pieces, I mean, dating back to like the early '80s, where I did pieces that had to do with surveillance, had to do with homeless.
Can you
And
tell us a little bit about your background? Because I think it would be helpful to understand the context from which these works are originating.
Well, I guess my background is like I'm an old hippie, basically. So um, I graduated from undergraduate in '75. So like in the '70s, it was a very turbulent time. I mean, it grew up grew up, matured during the, in fear of being sent to Vietnam. And I also grew up being under the threat of like a nuclear holocaust, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the death of Martin Luther King, the Kennedys, very turbulent times. And it's, it's stayed with me, the fact that we need to speak truth to power. So especially as I, became more and more involved in the arts, I've certainly gone back and forth to doing, I would prefer maybe if I could just concentrate on art for art's sake, but a lot of times I just end up coming back to things that are political, whether it's current events or revisiting things from history.
I think that's interesting, and that leads to a question that Joan Hall has for you, which is that do you look into the past as you're influenced by a political event in the present, or does it go back and forth? In other words, are you doing a lot of reading of historical events?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I am a history buff, so I do like a lot of reading about the history of print, how the history of print has been used, and so although I didn't put them up, but you could look at the work of Goya or Daumier, and you could see like how that kind of comes through and influences my work, that it's a social commentary thing. But yeah, it's a study of how these things keep reoccurring. So I see the ripples through time, how it's a never-ending struggle to try to gain rights. You lose rights. You gain freedoms, you lose freedoms. But it's a constant struggle, and I think it's one where artists do have agency. Museums and galleries have agency to address this.
So I think you might know from an historical understanding of Child's Gallery that I think oftentimes the gallery would shy away from content that made such a clear and specific partisan statement. For myself, that's what excites me about your work, because I feel like it's very much, indicative of the moment in time that we're living. And I will say that on a personal level, the day before the most recent midterm election, I was feeling not great, because I was afraid that many of the people that you have discussed were going to be the ones that prevailed. And I was pleasantly surprised that that's not what happened. And I feel like, as you were saying, it's people such as yourselves and other people that really have brought a lot of this to the attention. And of the broader public. And I'm just curious if you feel slightly more optimistic about the direction we're going, or do we have to be on edge for now until eternity?
It's a difficult question. I'm of two minds. As I said, I did breathe a sigh of relief, but I don't think, we haven't won a battle. I kind of felt like, in many ways, I kind of fell asleep a little bit during the Obama administration. I mean, I had some other kind of personal things going on in my life at the time that distracted me a little bit from politics. My wife was severely ill with cancer at the time, and a lot of it, my work then had to do with healing and grieving and that sort of thing. But I wasn't so concerned about politics then as, as waking up and like every month that went by during the Trump administration, it just seemed to be getting worse and worse. And even as I go, I go on Twitter or something and I see, well, all right, this is really bad that Elon Musk has bought Twitter now, because as much as he keeps saying he's a free speech absolutist, I see a lot of liberal journalists have been booted off, deplatformed from, and people that even moderately diss him at all, they're kicked off. So, and instead, he's letting a lot of right-wing trolls, known trolls, back on. So, one of the great places that things like Black Lives Matter and Me Too got their start was on Twitter, and now that's kind of gone, I think. So, the coming years, I don't think it's as good as we did during the midterms. I don't think we can turn our backs on these anti-democratic forces. I think they're still working on them.
It sounds like there's another print of Twitter and Elon Musk in your mind.
I'm sure that's going to become a piece at some point. Probably. Yeah.
So
currently, I'm working on one with the Supreme Court and Ginny Thomas, but I think right after that, I'm going to do a little bit with Twitter and media and that sort of thing. So
interesting. So how did your technique of the collaging of the historical imagery with current events come about?
Well, when Photoshop first premiered, I was really into digital collaging. I thought that was like one of the greatest tools ever, and I still use it a lot to help me lay out my wood blocks. And so I was, I wasn't really trained as a printmaker. I was trained as, when I went to art school, I did video art and sculpture, and I went back to school to learn some printmaking techniques. But I was like a digital collage, and I was really picked up on how I could use different filters to like collage different things. And but after a while, I just felt, well, all right, they're making this almost too easy. Like everybody's doing this now. I would need to be a little bit more expressive. And I was at a residency in Thailand, and I was going to like demonstrate my computer, skills, collaging and stuff. And it turns out that they didn't have the computer. The computers weren't available anyhow. And this was like there was a residency that involved like it was like a jamboree for youth, and we were like supposed to be giving demonstrations to all these. So I was put with a bunch of Buddhist monks who were doing wood carvings, and I didn't know anything. And here I am, like, I'm supposed to be like this great artist on a residency, and they're kind of making fun of me because I don't really know how to do art. And, so that, well, you can't really, you don't really know how to, use tools. You don't know how to do all this stuff. So all right, I am going to learn this. And then I just, I went to Japan a couple of times. I just got really hooked on woodcuts.
So you learned the technique, the technical way to make prints outside of art school.
Well, I actually went back. I obtained a second master's in printmaking, actually. I found out that there was here in Connecticut at Wesleyan University, they had a professor that was traditionally trained in woodblock, KG Sinahara, and I studied with him for several years. Now, when you're traditionally trained, you like start out by carving for 7 years, and you print for 7 years, and finally they call you a master. I mean, I'm no master, but I did learn my techniques by studying with somebody that was traditionally trained.
So is woodblock and woodcuts the only type of printmaking that you've engaged in?
I've done a little bit of silk screen, a little bit of solar printing, some lino cuts. I mean, I haven't touched etching in probably 40 years, but yeah, primarily I just do the woodcuts.
Fascinating. So you have some nice comments that I don't know if you have up, but I will read to you. MJ Benson says, so thought-provoking and fantastic use of the woodcut to approach these passions, and their youth. You're thanked for sharing your process and your thinking.
Nice.
And then Susan Schulman comments that your body of work is outstanding, thought-provoking, and she knows just how much time it takes to make them technically, and she's very excited to see them. So I'm going to let Joan unmute herself because she has a question about your process.
So William, this is a geeky print question, but I couldn't put it in a chat. So I noticed in some of the pieces, it's like there's this real sense of like a traditional woodcut where you see the grain. And then you do some that almost reflect the process of like silkscreen, where you have eliminated the grain of the wood. Is that a Japanese influence? I'm curious because I see that, I see that sort of in different pieces.
Yeah, I think that is a Japanese influence. I mean, when I did learn woodcut, I learned the Japanese method where you're doing a mokahanga with, you're printing with watercolors or one over the top of each other. You're getting a little bit more transparent look, which I don't know, it didn't suit my imagery as much as kind of the more opaque kind of colors that I can get with what I use is it's a soy-based ink now, Cranfield Color Fast, I think they're called. But
so do you vary that based on your conceptual imagery? Because
yes, I do.
I notice sometimes,
Yeah, sometimes I do like to have like some wood grain showing through, and other times that's not so important, and and they do end up looking a little bit more, like you say, a little bit more in the realm of silk screens.
Okay.
So in addition to the historical references, I feel like nostalgia also plays a role in some of the prints, and specifically consumed by the never was. Do you want to discuss a little bit about how you are influenced by nostalgia, or if you are?
Well, let's see. I guess the way to put that is, yes, I am influenced by nostalgia because TV was something very new when I was like a youngster. We never had a TV. I was like 7 years old, I think, and we got our first TV. Before that, we'd be sitting around the radio listening to, radio narratives. But yeah, so it was like a real fascinating thing to have this moving imageries, these pictures like brought right into your home. So and it's kind of, in a way, I think the things that come into your home via the TV set, at least in those days, like in the 50s and the 60s, I mean, you kind of like thought that's the way things were. This is like real history. These are the way, real families are, and this is the way the West was really won. And it takes like a long time until you realize that, this is pretty much a fantasy invention. So I do like to, revisit that and see what that is in terms of, making our, contemporary myths.
Interesting. I'm often fascinated by the different characteristics of people from a different generation. And I know a lot of people would be surprised to know that there was a time when televisions didn't exist. So that makes a lot of sense. So Catherine Rosing has a question. She'd like you to speak a little bit more about how you're influenced by other artists. In other words, are there specific aspects of their work that influence your work? Technical, compositional, conceptual?
Ooh, yeah, I pick up different things from different artists. Like for instance, William Kentridge. I really love his broad range of the way he takes different art forms. He doesn't just stick with like one art form. I mean, he does videos, stop motion. He does puppetry. He just just kind of like a genius in terms of getting the content out. And so I love him for the content. I look at Kolwitz and I just look at the expressive nature of the black and white imagery. So like in some instance I say, well, geez, I really want my work maybe to look a little bit less like Joan was saying, maybe a little bit less like the silkscreen, a little bit more expressive, like maybe like consumed by the Never Was. I mean, I'm a little bit looser there. I'm trying to be a little bit more just sensitive to like just coming up with something expressive, black and white. So there are different aspects that I take from different artists. And it's usually just like one specific thing, like Kara Walker. I like how she uses nostalgia to touch on contemporary themes. I mean, she's dealing with her silhouettes stuff expressly deals with like kind of reconstruction after Civil War kind of era, but yet it's touching on contemporary themes. So there's like little bits and pieces from the past that just keep resonating with me, and I just think that I'm a combination of a lot of different artists that I've taken stolen little bits and pieces from.
Well, I think it's interesting, that the images that you put up, because once you point them out, one can see that in the work. So one of the things that I think is true about art that is contemporary, is that it is about reflecting a very particular moment in time, some much more explicitly than others. And clearly, this body of work is highly specific to this moment in time. And so my question to you would be, where would you like to see, how would you like to see these works consumed? Meaning, do you want them in private collections? Do you want them mass published? What would you see as your ideal venue for the works? I will point out that a majority of the works are being collected by institutions, because I think that there's clearly a desire to record what's going on in the moment.
Well, I would agree. I think what I'm producing now is probably directed more towards institutions rather than individual collectors, although I kind of asked that question in my remarks there, just like who would like this? Who would want this on their walls? Is it an individual collector? It could be, and there certainly are people that that collect this work as individuals, but I think for the most part, I think I'm dealing with like an institution that would probably be most likely to express an interest in this type of thing, just as it is a record or a witness of the current times.
Do you think that
I mean, a book project would be excellent too. I think it would. I think
well,
it would go
that's
well.
one of my thoughts.
I think
Well,
it would
because
be-
I think that let me just see how so an observation that I would make, and is that, do you feel like this new body of work has enabled you to feel like you have a voice to counter that of the mass media propaganda? And
a tiny, tiny, but
that's why the question
I
is,
feel that I do have some agency, that's and I think that gives me like a little bit of an imperative to work in this vein, to keep working on this as a tangent, until however long it takes me to find something new. But yeah, I think as artists we do have like some agency that we can we can maybe change the way some people look at different things via our work, if it's not too obscure. I mean, I try not to, maybe I'm hitting people over the head with it. I don't know. It's it might be a little too didactic, but I'm just going with it right now.
well, one of the things that specifically, and this is probably a recurring comment I've made at various artist talks, that I'm interested in as the sort of whatever you would say the identity of the gallery is, which is this idea of both a contemporary voice in relation to the historical voice. So one is always influencing the other and back and forth, but also at the same time very conscious of what the product of art is and technically how it's made, and the fact that they will have a place in the history of art. So I think I think they're very successful in that way. Another
I
comment.
would also say, I would echo your idea that, certainly galleries have some agency too. I mean, there's certainly galleries can, exhibit a variety of things, and some art is very, very safe, very, you're working with maybe more decorative kind of things, but some galleries certainly take chances with the type of art they show, and a lot of times that it takes a while for people to realize the importance of something that's difficult.
So that's actually a very nice compliment to myself and the gallery. And when Stephanie Bond and I took over the gallery in 2009, we were like, I described us as like the Pillsbury Doughboys, because everyone was sort of poking us to see what we were about. And someone who's a very well-known dealer in New York that I would aspire to be like, called Child's Gallery the quote unquote easy listening station of art. And I didn't like that.
I can see
And,
why.
and I think that post-pandemic, I think when everyone was sort of observing or taking stock in what it is that they wanted to do going forward, I have felt like it's very important that the gallery use its platform to put work art there that's relevant. So I do thank you for that, because I feel like you're a very good addition to the gallery, and certainly producing work that I think is meaningful and is saying something about where we are now. And I'm sure, as all artists experience, that it's a labor of love, and it's a passion.
Well, it
So
really is, and I just want to add that, yeah, I mean the recent shows there, where from Joan's show where she's addressing ocean ecology, whether Robert Friedman dealing with like Black experience. I mean, there's just and of course you deal with the LGBTQ all the time. You're just dealing with like contemporary issues, things that are affecting us all right now. So I don't think you're in danger of being easy listening at this point.
And I think Ravenna Taylor agreed with you, so I will thank her for that. I don't think I fully understood what that comment meant at the time, but I feel like I understand it better now. What's interesting too is that I think that there are a lot of artists out there that are saying really important things, and all the better to say it through the medium of art. So Susan Schulman mentions that you've created a historical snapshot of the times, definitely a value both to institutions and for personal purchase. You're a journalist in paper. So I think that's a nice, actually, that's a really nice phrase, a journalist in paper.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Susan. Susan and I have collaborated on various artworks in the past. So.
Oh, and speaking of collaboration, Joan has invited you, if you want to make a very large print. She has a press that's 60 by 96 inches.
Well, I just got a new press that, it's like 4 foot by 6 foot, which I think is big, but yeah, hers is enormous. So yeah.
The press bed is actually 5 by 10 feet, but it's easier to print 5 by 8. You can print 5 by 8.5.
Wow. I'll have to take you up on that.
There's a guest room. You're invited.
Oh, thank you, Joan. Not too far away either. It's right over in Rhode Island.
So we have a couple more minutes. I wanted just to see if anyone else had something they would like to comment or ask. If you do, feel free to unmute yourself. So is there anything you'd like to say in closing, William?
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for showing up here. I do see a lot of familiar faces and familiar names from Facebook and in real life too. So like, it really means a lot so many people show up to listen to me blab on about this.
Well, I do want to point out that we record these talks and they are available on our YouTube channel, and so people will be able to people that couldn't see it will be able to watch it again. So with that, I would like to thank you all for attending, and again invite you to either view the exhibition virtually on our website, childsgallery.com, or at 168 Newbury Street. We have a wonderful new print department, and we welcome all. So William, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. This was very, very enjoyable.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank
William.
you.